Greetings and welcome to a preamble just before the video that you're expecting to watch when you clicked on this. This month, Andy and I have reached a grand old age of 50 episodes, 50 months recording the watching brief. How do you feel about that, Andy?
I feel it's about time we grew up. If,
It's
if we're that old, we need to grow up.
it's certainly an opportunity to make some changes. And one of the things that we're wanting to do is shift from a monthly format that then we break up into smaller pieces once a month to something which is a bit more fleet of foot, something which is a weekly release, a shorter release, and a release that allows us to focus on different aspects of what we were already covering in the watching brief. I mean, Andy, you had some thoughts on the different segments we might do.
Well, the thing that I've got most interest in, obviously, is the news aspect, and I think going to a weekly rather than a monthly format means that we can be more news driven,
Mm.
and actually probably respond to more news stories than we would do in a normal monthly watching brief. We could cover more stories, probably in a shorter format, but it means we can pack more in, basically.
Well, pack more in, but also, I suppose, respond in a more timely fashion. So instead of waiting
Yes,
3 weeks to talk about something that's come up in the news, we can actually tackle
exactly.
it in that week. We
Yeah.
also want to chop and change some of this stuff, so it won't always be a weekly release. This is news driven. Some of it may be opinion driven, editorials. Some of it may well be inviting other people in for hot takes. For example, we've long been threatening to get Mr. Tristan Boyle on to talk about museums with Andy, and I'm looking forward to seeing that um, meeting of minds, shall we say? And also, we're separating out the media picks as well. We sort of hinted at that last month, but we want to be able to give that segment, maybe have that segment be slightly longer, actually make it an hour as opposed to half an hour perhaps, but a situation where we can engage with our love of media and the arts and archaeology in a way that allows it to breathe and is explicitly opinion and analysis driven. So hopefully it should mean more variety in a more timely fashion and in a way which encourages you guys to directly get involved in the conversation. So if you wanted to cover something in a given week or in the following week, you can send us an email and we will be able to get onto that in that following week. Um, Keep an eye on us. I say it's been 50 episodes, and hopefully there'll be at least 50 more months to go. And enjoy the coming video. Cheers. We're just going to start by talking about three news stories in one segment, which all seem to be quite important, but also are ongoing issues. So beginning with a couple of articles from a website called The Pipeline.
Never heard of it.
I mean, we're really scraping the barrel when it comes to sources, aren't we?
I know
But
these dodgy, obscure internet news websites. I mean, it's fake news, all of it.
yeah, so I'd be watch out for for pop-ups on this one.
Sure.
Sussex police failed to arrest three metal detectorists at 11:30 at night, and do them for COVID regulations instead, and also rallies beginning again at Braintree MD Club today, and sovereign metal detecting. Um, what's going on? Is this a because we've been talking about metal detecting for a few months now in relation to redefining treasure. The government was making a push to make a new definition of treasure in a way of tackling elements of the less trustworthy metal detectorists out there. Is this related to that, or is this something else from that culture?
I think it's part of the mood music, really.
Mm,
And again, we always have to start by saying that the majority of metal detectorists act ethically. Many of them report their finds to the Portable Antiquities Scheme, as the Code of Practice says they should. And often people, even who win treasure awards, actually waive the awards and pass the artifacts onto museums if they want them and so on. So there are good things that come out of metal detecting, and also the kind of data that is collected through the Portable Antiquity Scheme. What these stories are about really are the flip side of that, which
mm.
everybody recognises, and in fact many metal detectorists recognise, which is the people who skim very close to the law or the wrong side of the law.
Yes.
Um, and these issues are particularly in the news at the moment because of the government consultation that's going on about the redefinition of treasure, and also the strong suspicion that restrictions on the hobby are coming in some form or other, yet to be defined. Probably restrictions on large rallies.
And as
So,
we've also talked about, this seems to be, as you say, part of the mood music, because the mood music because the government is particularly interested not so much in protecting heritage, but rather protecting the artifactual nature of Britain's history. This also, it has to be said, comes at a time when Britain is planning on setting up free ports across the country, which will have their own unique tax and regulatory framework. And so we've described this in the past as being a little bit schizophrenic in terms of the approach. On the one hand, um, being quite happy for things to be monetized in a way which is within the rules, but on the other hand, um, seemingly, if you're not looking too closely, appearing to be particularly concerned with the integrity of Britain's archaeological record. Uh, so, I mean, what is this? Is this a good development? Is this something which is just happening because of COVID? Where should we
right,
see this, and when will we see a conclusion to this sort of saga of the Treasure Act?
right. There are a number of strands here. Um, the Treasure Act has been in force since 1996,
Hmm.
and one of the stories that we've picked up this month is the fact that two people in Essex, people who've been named as a man called Shane Wood and a woman called Kim Holman, uh, from um, from the south part of Essex in East Anglia, have been charged with offences under the Treasure Act.
Mm,
And Mr. Wood has also been charged with going equipped to steal.
yes.
Um, and these are related to the alleged failure to report a treasure find to the coroner as they're supposed to under the Treasure Act.
Hmm.
Now, I can't say any more than that because that's what the police have released, and it's now a live court case. So contempt of court rules apply, and we have to be very careful about what we say.
So in that
And
sense,
obviously they will deny the. I'm sure they will deny that they're guilty of anything.
yeah. So in
Um,
that sense,
so
then, is it possible to speculate on what it means to go somewhere equipped to steal? Do we know what that means legally or not? Would this mean having a metal detector, or would it mean having other artifacts with you,
um,
or tools?
Not talking about
Hypothetically,
this
yes.
hypothetically, not talking about this case in particular. For example, if I was caught on a scheduled ancient monument with a metal detector in the boot of my car,
Hmm.
and a newly excavated Roman coin, um, and there was a divot a few meters away on the in the grass,
Hmm.
um, a police officer might reasonably charge me with uh, both interfering with an ancient monument, and if say the object was gold,
Hmm.
um, taking treasure under the Treasure Act, and because I had a metal detector and there appeared to be evidence of the use of a metal detector, yeah, I could also be charged with going equipped to steal,
I see. Okay.
because that would be theft.
Okay. So
Um,
it's not so
so
that in that sense, it's not as though someone had like a swag bag and a crowbar and a mask and a flat cap. It's not that kind of thing. It's much more nuanced
No,
than that.
no. I mean, in the past, for example, people have been charged with similar offences for example, poaching.
Hmm.
And if they've got camouflage clothing and balaclavas in the boot of the car,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Yes. Okay.
So it's a police officer drawing a reasonable inference from the evidence they discover at the alleged crime scene.
Okay. Now, I don't know what you were just about to go on to, but this does come in the context at the end of March of the National Trust reporting that they are concerned, uh, as 100 metal detecting holes have appeared in and around the Runnymede Magna Carta site. This is, I think, in Surrey.
Yes.
So this is not just, as it were, you and I. picking on individual cases. This is something which even national bodies are having to sort of flag as something which they're concerned about.
Well, I mean, our regular viewer might remember we talked in the past about historic England being concerned about sites on Hadrian's Wall being hit by illegal metal detecting. Just this last few weeks, there's been another report from Scotland about a site on the Antonine Wall, which is a World Heritage Site, like Hadrian's Wall, also being attacked by metal detectorists. So it's an ongoing problem. Some argue it's possibly even an increasing problem. We haven't seen data yet, but certainly anecdotally there are suggestions that more people have been buying metal detectors during lockdown, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
There is an increasing number of people who appear to be metal detecting outside of the traditional either individual or club system that developed over the last 40 years. Again, one of the reasons people are concerned about rallies is not just the large numbers, but you've got there often individuals who can't get permissions anywhere else and aren't members of clubs, but come in and pay their £25 a day or whatever to metal detect. And there are no checks and balances. There are no, you're not working with peers who've been doing it for years who can teach you the rules and the law. And so on. So that's why I think the story is topical.
Yeah, it's problematic. Okay, you've mentioned here in our notes an important article about the public benefit in developer-funded archaeology.
That's right. This is an article I picked up, thanks to Twitter. It popped up on my Twitter feed the other day. And it's an article by Sadie Watson. It appears in Internet Archaeology. And in it, she talks about the need really for people working in developer-funded archaeology to become more engaged with the ideas of public benefit. It's something we've talked about often. And it talks about the benefits of interacting with communities, archaeology is done with a community rather than done to a community, which again is something we've talked about in the past. She acknowledges the commercial problems in that some developers might not even want to pay for archaeology at all, and so they'll get away with the bare minimum that they can as a planning condition. But others see the advantage of that. I remember going back many years now to the beginnings of large commercial projects, and one of the new terminal at Heathrow that was built by the consortium of the British Airports Authority, but the archaeology for that was done by a consortium of archaeological groups, including the Museum of London Archaeology. And their brief was to do it state of the art. They want the developers saw a benefit in being flying the flag for responsible development, if you like. I'll just read a line from her conclusion. It's not a long article, but it's a very thought-provoking one. I just think people should take it on board. But I mean, basically, she says a career in field archaeology is an ambition for many, and I'm forever grateful to have been able to work on many exciting and challenging projects. I've tried to communicate these feelings to others and have felt reciprocal excitement about what's been excavated. She's talking about that excitement we all get when we're able to share what we do with people who care about what we do.
Yeah.
But she says, there remains a disconnect, however, between the public and the archaeology itself, which remains divided no matter how many village halls I fill. The passive concept of presentation or engagement are no longer sufficient. As I get older, I've been drawn to the idea that our very practice, its methods and results should be incorporated in a more participatory approach. It is this that my project seeks to evolve through careful negotiation of complex systems of development-led archaeology. This is a pilot project to research how that public engagement might be made more responsive, more inclusive. Give the public more ownership of the archaeology that's done in their communities.
Is there I mean, there doesn't seem to be any downside to that, but I mean, is there any foreseeable pushback against that kind of thing within archaeology? I suppose
It's too early to.
to put it another way, why is this a
Mm.
story? If you know what I mean, as opposed
It's a
to
story because,
yeah,
first of all, it's somebody from developer-funded archaeology saying actually the status quo is probably not adequate
yeah,
and needs to change. The sector needs to develop. I think there's a suggestion, for example, that the system has become a little bit ossified
mm,
since PPG 16. That developers get their planning consent with an archaeological condition. They discharge the archaeological condition with the more or less happily, grudgingly, whatever. It's a bit like a mechanical process, and the report's churned out at the end, and
so
it goes
fulfilling a
into an online
function.
repository.
Mm,
It's fulfilling a function, but
mm,
it's not actually. It's the food's keeping you alive, but it's not actually nourishing you.
yeah, or
You know,
nourishing, in this case, nourishing the people who live in and around that archaeology. And
precisely,
yes, yeah,
precisely, yeah,
okay,
precisely.
okay,
And in the worst cases, we're seeing a disconnect between the archaeology, the development, and those communities. So, for example, when you get a controversial development like Stonehenge, which again we've talked about many times, and we'll be talking about again in the relatively near future, that is a case where archaeology can be, seen as as I say, something that is at best being done to people
mm,
who might not actually care or want it, and
mm,
at worst, they're seen as complicit in something that's unacceptable to a broad constituency for whatever reason, ecological or heritage or whatever.
okay, interesting. So there are multiple benefits there. By the sounds of it, to that sort of work, and that sounds well worth reading. And finally, it snuck in at the end of the month. You were suggesting
Yes.
it should have been an April Fool's from the government to the world, in fact, not just to the United Kingdom. But it seems that the
Yeah.
government has published a report in which the government has more or less found itself through an independent process, apparently, to be a beacon of racial justice, and that our history education needs to reflect this more more proudly, shall we say. Even go so far as to what you've described here as rebranding slavery as a cultural opportunity. Now we're going to probably talk about this in more detail in a near future episode, but
Yeah.
just to point people towards this and sort of prime them. Why is this a big issue?
Okay. What this
Sorry,
is,
the document. I don't mean racism, of course. I know why
yeah,
racism's a big issue. So, but why is
absolutely,
this document a big issue?
absolutely.
Yes.
The document is a big issue. Right. The backstory. When the Boris Johnson won the general election in Christmas 2019, shortly afterwards he appointed a commission chaired by Dr. Tony Sewell, CBE, who's an educationalist, who had worked with Johnson before when he was Mayor of London on issues of race and equality and education, to chair a commission, which is a formal government body, which is appointed to research a particular item. The accusation is that basically Boris Johnson and Mirza wanted to give themselves a free pass on issues of racism, as highlighted by, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement and the dunking of Edward Colston's statue in Bristol Harbour and so on.
One statue.
Yes, one statue of
Yes.
an absolutely appalling slaver.
Yeah, but one statue. We haven't had a spate of statue tearing
No,
down anyway.
no, no, no,
Yes.
no, no, no. Mind you, with the number of police that have been standing around the foot of statues, it's hardly surprising.
Mm.
Not suggesting that the government wasn't virtue signalling or anything. Anyway, no, the thing is, it's a 258-page report. It is. I urge people to read it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons it's become controversial is both Sewell and Mirza were on the record in the past of believing that the what's often called institutional racism, something that was highlighted by the Macpherson report into the murder of Stephen Lawrence, is not a thing, and certainly not a thing anymore.
Yes.
And therefore, the government doesn't need to try and do anything about it. Britain's institutions are not institutionally racist, and therefore we don't. It's not an issue we need to address. Now, the pushback on that is that a lot of people from the various ethnic communities have said basically that goes against our lived experience. The report says, well, actually, you're wrong. Now, you can see where the controversy is coming. Why it's important for us in the heritage sector. It does have things to say. The report does have things to say about also the teaching history. It takes very much
the need to create new resources. In fact,
the need to create new resources to make sure that history is taught in a way that isn't politically biased. It reads like a press release from the DCMS.
Well, it's not politically biased, and yet it calls for us to be much prouder of the Empire period, to talk about the
Right.
benefits of Empire for the Commonwealth.
Absolutely, and the most controversial line in the whole thing comes from the foreword, which was written by Sewell, where this sentence appears, and I think I'll just read it, and people can take what they want from it. I say, go away and read the report, and I think we're likely to be discussing it again. As we're recording this morning, it's become public that the senior advisor on race issues in Number 10 has actually resigned.
Right.
It's not clear whether it's directly connected to this report, but certainly there's a suggestion that he found it increasingly uncomfortable to operate within the Number 10 machine. Okay. But this is the line that has really upset people. Quote, "There is a new story about the Caribbean experience which speaks to the slave period not only being about profit and suffering, but how culturally African people transform themselves into a remodeled African/Britain," end quote.
Right.
Yeah. In other words, people have taken that as saying basically slavery was this wonderful cultural opportunity to become British.
Yeah. This is how they became British. Yeah, this is how. And
yes.
then, and it wasn't something that was done to them. Rather, it was an opportunity to alter themselves. And yeah, it's it. Okay.
There are all sorts of complexities around that.
But of course, that's less political. That's less political.
Like I said, people should read the report, read the responses to the report, and I think this is I think the government hoped this report would put some of these issues to bed. It's not doing that.
No,
so far at least.
But it is likely going to be wheeled out like Hannibal Lecter every time someone tries to start a debate along these lines. Well, we've done a report, and the report said. So yeah, it's an
absolutely. Well, I mean, there was one other very interesting side issue to this. It was the way the release of the report yesterday was handled as a piece of press manipulation. It was brilliant, because what they did was release selected lines to selected journalists the night before, with an embargo saying that they couldn't seek independent opinion on those lines before midnight, which was after most of the first editions at least had been put to bed by the news organisations, and that the report wouldn't be released until mid-morning yesterday. But Sewell was doing an interview round for the breakfast news shows. So the journalists who were writing the briefs for the breakfast news presenters didn't know what was fully in the report. So basically, the government was able to get out the line it wanted and appeared duly on the front page of a Daily Mail, for example, which was basically, Britain's no longer a racist country. It should be a beacon to the rest of the world.
A model for other majority white countries, I believe. Is the
precisely, as the report says. Yes.
Okay.
So we can argue about the motivations behind that. Obviously, it was a slick, efficient news operation, and the government wanted to get a particular message out. Whether that message has any resemblance to reality, of course, is people will draw their own conclusions.
Okay. Well, we'll undoubtedly return to that in the near future. This has been a slightly compressed series of 3 news articles, but I think actually this segment is essentially the size that we want to do weekly from now on, isn't it? In terms of our new watching brief. So maybe bunging in 3 news stories once a week will mean that you get we or once every 2 weeks if we're doing other things as well, will mean that we get to have these sorts of conversations more regularly. So undoubtedly we'll return to that, but let us move on